You may have been called on to do something that you thought was incredibly, if not impossibly, difficult. But few people in the history of the world have been called on to do what Abraham was called on to do. James illustrates it when he's talking about the relationship of faith and works in chapter 2 of his letter. In James 2, beginning at verse 20, he says, "Do you want to be shown, O foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless or dead? Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness, and he was called a friend of God." Like I said, few people have ever been called on to do what Abraham was called on to do that we read about in Genesis 22, to sacrifice his son Isaac on the altar. We gain a little bit of insight into that incident when we read Hebrews chapter 11, that great chapter about people and their faith, and it tells us that Abraham had decided in his mind that if he offered Isaac on that altar and Isaac died, that God would bring him back from the dead. You know, that's really phenomenal because Abraham had never seen that happen before. There are resurrections in the Bible, but none had happened before this point. And Abraham had so much faith and trust in God, he believed in something that God could do that had never even happened before. And we see Abraham's faith was completed by the works that he did. And I want you to notice something else about this passage. There's a contrast between the verses we read about a term that's used at the beginning and a term that's used at the end. In the beginning, it talks about the foolish person. And at the end, it talks about Abraham and calls him the friend of God. So does our faith and our relationship with God, does it make us foolish, or does it make us his friend?